Directions we had gotten that we had worked out outside of Jank to clarify some things that we felt should be in the CTES. So you'll see things that are stricken here, and what I'll do for the next round is they're still working on it, getting the CTS handbook so that it looks, all of this stuff is now in that. So right now this replaces the Article 2G that I gave you before, and this should reflect all the changes. If there's anything else we missed, let me know.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll review this and then get back with you if there's, because there was one piece that when we reviewed it before that we did not transfer over from the old 2G to the CTES. So it's not this document so much as it is CTES. So I'm not sure which one, but it was just one item.
And there was one thing there. You'll see paragraph 11. It's on the last page, so I'll kind of walk you through it. We had talked about procedural defects. So if the administrator doesn't do the required number of observations, they don't give the feedback and all that stuff. So what do we do? And what we had before is there was nothing in the contract or in the CTES to address it. So what would happen is those, whatever, let's say it was a formal observation, that formal observation would be invalidated. And if they hadn't done a second formal, then the person would be not evaluated for the year. So, and it ended up hurting employees. So what we have here is a procedural defects. It mirrors some of what's in the MOU we had about the low 300 and the hardship transfer provision. We figured let's look and see, because that committee ran really well and came up with great decisions. So if the teacher believes that there's some procedures that weren't followed, there's a review board, and the review board is 2 members, CTA members from Jank and 2 district members from Jank. And then there's going to be a unanimous or majority vote of the 4-member review to reject the appeal as final and not subject to appeal. If there's a 2-2 vote, that's a vote to reject, but that then is appealable to the CTA executive director and the district's chief of human resources, who are going to meet and come up with a final non-appealable decision. And then there are some timelines set in here so that the Category 1A employees have to file an appeal by May 5th. Category 1B and 2 employees have to file by April 5th. The reason that is those dates are in there is that way if it's a 1B or a 2 employee, then there's the opportunity, the remedy can be that the observer comes back and does another follow-up, so that it's not that we just throw something out, but it gives an opportunity for everybody to have the process run the way it's supposed to. Okay.
All right, we'll get back with you. Thank you.
All right. And at that, I'm going to hand the show over to Michael Burke to go over our financial overview.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Mr. Burke.
So at our last session, as CTA has presented or offered, it also presented some financial information about where the money may come from. So that kind of prompted us. We wanted to kind of go back and take you through our finances in where we see the district's financial position and the implications for bargaining here today. I want to start off. You've seen versions of this slide before, but I want to spend a little time just to recognize that we're not getting a lot of help out of our legislature and governor. You all know that, but just looking back at where we've been the last 20 years or so, it's been kind of a painful ride as we've slid from the 30th. In terms of funding per student, Florida, if you go back to 1996, we were 30th in the nation. So we were still in the bottom half, but we were at 30. And by 2007, we slipped to 36th. And then as of 2017, which is the latest data available, this is from the National Center of Education Statistics. So it's good data. We've fallen to 45th now, and we trailed the national average by 26%. That's a pretty huge margin. And what's kind of alarming is you look out to the right there, those are all the states that have passed Florida by over that 20-year span. And there's some states there you're probably surprised to see, that Florida has the 4th largest economy of all the states. Our gross domestic product is over $1 trillion now. But we only invest about 2.7% into education, where most states on average invest 3.3%. That difference is about $5.8 billion across our whole state. So that is why we struggle here. And it's been an ongoing struggle. and we don't get a lot of help with funding. The focus in Florida for 20 years has been about accountability and school choice, and this thought that if you just make us more accountable, we'll perform better, and money's not really the issue. And I think we see now that people are finally starting to wake up and say, yeah, money is a necessity. We've got 21 districts that passed referendums, and we finally got to, it's flawed, the governor's proposal, I know there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, but at least there's a conversation around putting some type of investment into teacher salaries next year. And just to point out also, so in Palm Beach County, Florida's at 45th in the country. If you factor in what our voters helped us with $1 million, that would essentially elevate Palm Beach. We'd be on par with the 38th state in the country, which is South Dakota. Florida does a little better when you look at the National Center stats for teacher salaries. Florida ranked 36th in the country as of 2017, but that's a pure ranking on salary. It does not get into cost of living, and I've seen other reports and rankings that Florida falls much closer to the bottom when you start factoring the high cost of living. If you factor in the referendum of what we've done in Palm Beach, you could argue we're equivalent to like the 22nd state. So this is just looking back a little bit of what we've received in terms of funding increases. And the final conference, that's when the state approves their budget and then the governor signs off, but that's when the House and Senate come together and they've finalized the budget for the year. And we've gone back to FY13. FY13, we received a 2.41% increase per student, and you can see below that the base student allocation was about $104, and we got about $46 in categoricals. And that year we settled with a 3.4% package in terms of recurring salary increase. FY14 is kind of an interesting year now as we hear another governor talking about teacher salaries, but you may recall, I know some of you were on the team, when Governor Scott wanted to do something about teacher salaries. I think he put about $480 million in across the state, and we were able to negotiate that raise and then also complement it with local money, but that was kind of one of our bigger settlements at 4.7% that year. FY15, we had a 2.61% from the state, but it was actually a hard year budget-wise. We were only able to settle on a 2% increase, and that 2% was effective January 1, so it wasn't even it didn't go back to July,
March. That was March 1.
Or March, I'm sorry. Was it March 1st? Yeah, okay.
Spring.
I remember it was just towards the end of the year, yeah.
The third of the year.
Okay, yep, thank you for that. FY16, 3% from the state. We were able to get to 3.2%, and then we've kind of, worked hard to get on this track where you see like kind of the next, for 4-year run there, we've been right around 3%. Well, exactly almost 3%. The state increases, FY17, 1%, FY18, 1.39%, FY19, 1.39% again. You look below, we've had a mix. A lot of that money was in categoricals over those years. FY19 was, it's not, we got 47 cents in the BSA in FY19. If you go back to FY17, we got $6.26. So we've always had to work to manage our finances locally with basically very little help from the state. Our inflation has run about 2% over this same span. And now for FY20, I really feel like this was deceptive. The state came out and bragged that they had given us over a 3% increase. We know that's not true because what they did was they shifted the Best and Brightest program into the FEFP, and it showed up in FY20 only, so their year-over-year comparisons were really, they took advantage of the $284.5 million in Best and Brightest, and in the prior year, FY19, they showed it as a zero. Best and Brightest was around. It was just in a separate state allocation, and it was a little less. It was about $233 million, but still that really skewed the percentages. It was a little better than the prior year, but we haven't had a good run regardless. Most of what we've been able to do at the bargaining table is out of the board making the best use of their money, wherever they can save money, be more efficient, and then we've covered some of our costs. We've helped, with the referendum, with some of the security and the new mental health initiatives, but really Palm Beach kind of, if it stands out because we have voter support, and we've had some stability, and we've been able to get on a good track here. You all presented a slide that we could not replicate. I'm not sure exactly what your methodology was, but you looked at teacher salaries as a percentage of general revenue, and you were like in the 30% range. Our budget, when we break down the whole $2 billion operating budget, we're at 69% right now in the classroom, direct classroom expense. And teacher salaries and benefits are our biggest component of that. So when we do the math, we're in the 60% range. And this shows you the history going back to FY07. We went all the way back to FY07 because that was kind of pre-Great Recession. And one thing that's going on here is that you see the percentages getting bigger in some of those years during the recession. That's because our revenue was going down. But, we have to serve the kids, and we need to keep teachers working in the classrooms. So that actually had an impact on what percentage. It was probably more of just necessity and funds going down than actually, compensation and negotiations and all that. So you can see we've been pretty constant. There's a little bit of a slip from FY16 to FY19. Going into FY20, we project that will go up significantly. We do have the benefit of the referendum that's going to play out this year. And in FY20 CTA, I think that's where we just tried to pencil in based on the CTA's proposal. That's where we would be, right?
Right, that was based on the CTA proposal from the last meeting. And you also have to take into consideration when you look at general revenue in FY20, the best and brightest is included in general revenue. So if you're looking at general revenue, you have the increase in the referendum is included in there, as well as best and brightest. So you have to make sure you're taking in those two expenses in consideration when you're looking at a percentage of general revenue. You can't take credit for the revenue and not the related expenditures.
So this kind of points out more. So the line on the top, the red line, is the same thing, the percentage of salary and benefits of CTA salary and benefits as a percentage of general revenue. The blue bar is our funding per student year over each year. You can see our funding per student decline and pretty significantly during the recession, with FY12 I guess being rock bottom there. That was a substantial. We lost over $1,000 per student. So we have kind of gradually reclined. It took till 2018 just to get even. It took 10 years to get to the same funding per student that we had pre-recession. And, you can see that the salary percentage in the years where the funding went down, the percentage goes up. Now that our funding is more on track, it's kind of leveled off. Another thing we're dealing with this round of bargaining that really can't be ignored is the pretty dramatic change in the percentage of teachers that are highly effective. The orange line just shows you within your group the percentage of teachers that are evaluated that are highly effective. So in the last 3 years, we've gone from 61.2% to 71.7%, when we were bargaining last year. And now this year, when we're bargaining for FY20, based on really the 2019 school year and evaluations, we're at 98.2% highly effective. So I mentioned, our settlements have been in the 3% ballpark. The last 2 years, they were essentially the same package. It cost a little more in 19 because we had more highly effective, but it's much more dramatic. If we were to do the same settlement we had last year, or that we had 2 years ago, it takes about $2.8 million more in money to cover that. So that's one of the things we are struggling with. When you think about if you were running a business or doing anything, the number of employees you have plays a part, right? If you could get by with fewer employees, you might be able to pay them more money. So this analysis, we looked at what our average teacher salary is in the state. The average teacher salary in Florida is $48.46. Palm Beach right now is 11th in the state in terms of average salary, but we staff more teachers than other districts. If we looked at just Dade and Broward to our south, they seem to have fewer teachers, serving more students. So what we've done here is, you look at like Palm Beach, where we are. Our average salaries right now is $49,602 when this was polled for FY19. And this is a state report. We've got 12,554 teachers and 190,000 students. So we were at, for every teacher, we had 15.15 students. And if you looked in Miami-Dade or Broward, Broward was 16.77 students per teacher, and Dade was 17.74 students per teacher. So then on the bottom half of that page, what we did was said, well, how much could we increase the average salary in Palm Beach if we went to those staffing ratios? And they do staff their classes bigger. It's not, and it's across the board really. It's including basic education. We're at 18 to 1 when we calculate K-3 teachers. They're at 19 to 1 in Broward. So it's that type of thing. But if we were able to do that, we could boost. You can see, the average for if we were on Broward's staffing model, we'd be up to like $54,914, or on Dade's as high as $58,101. This comes into play because, if you wanted to try to achieve something like this and get the job done with fewer teachers and pay people more money, we'd probably start talking about things like the 6th period again, and could we get to where other districts do that, where teachers are teaching 6 periods rather than 5 in the secondary level, or maybe looking at going from a 7.5-hour day to an 8-hour day. That would generate some money that we could try to work with at the bargaining table. And this is a comparison of the financial condition ratio. The state puts out a report every year. This is how they measure. They look at our fund balance and calculate a percentage, and they do it statewide. So what we've done is we've looked at the urban 7, the largest 7 school districts in Florida, and this again goes back to FY07, and it's pretty interesting. Let me just point out the blue bar that is in the highest, there, especially in the out years. That's Orange County, Orlando, Florida. Orange County, they passed a 1 mil referendum back in 2010. So they've had it in place. They've renewed it. They've had it in place for a long time. They did not partner with their union and do large salary increases. They didn't have referendum supplements or all that. They used a lot of the money at first for non-recurring costs. They bought a lot of technology. They've shored up their reserves. And as a result, they have basically the largest reserves in the state at over 20%. Hillsborough County's in purple. And that's kind of an interesting story, too. You may remember years ago, Palm Beach was in competition with Hillsborough for a Gates grant to restructure teacher compensation and create job paths and job progressions and all that stuff. And, we missed out on it. It was a $100 million grant opportunity, but it had a lot of implications for Hillsborough, and they ended up basically creating a lot of salary structures they couldn't maintain when the grant ran out. And they went from having the largest fund balance in the state, and they went through some really tough times where they were spending about $50 million a year more than they had, and they've just recently kind of started to pull out of that. And then, we always look pretty close to Dade and Broward. Dade is in red there, and they've had their ups and downs. They were pretty low for a while. Palm Beach is in orange. And, if you look pre-recession, looks like we're about 7.5% there. That spike, you'll see a spike in a lot of districts in FY11 and FY12. That was because of the recession. We had federal stimulus monies. You remember the ARA program, which is America Recovery and Reinvestment Act. We got an infusion of federal dollars that we had to use to help get us through a couple of years, basically. And a big chunk of that sat in fund balance for a couple of years, and we spread the money to really help soften the cuts we were receiving from the state. We'd lost over $1,000 per kid through the state budget, so the federal money was key. But that spent down, and then it looks, we kind of bottomed out in FY14 at just above 5%. which is low. And we've worked hard to kind of stabilize things and start building that up a little bit. But, you know, as of FY18 is the latest data we could get to have all the districts, you know, from around the state. We've kept this little trend of rising up a little bit, and we're in the 8% range, getting close to 9%. But that's a good thing as a school district. It's not to shortchange our employees. It's to provide stability and put us in a position where hopefully we're able to withstand, you know, the next time we have a downturn. You can see we're in the pack. You know, we're not Orange County. We're not flush with cash. And, you know, we're not rock bottom, which we do not want to be. Right now, Broward is kind of heading in the wrong direction. And, you know, they're struggling to come up with a salary offer for their teachers this year. So a lot gets said about, well, the state does have a requirement when it comes to fund balance. They have a 3% minimum. And this is not the desired state to be at 3%. 3% is like when the red flags start being raised. And if you fall below 3%, you have to submit a plan to the state and let them know, recognizing that you've got a problem and how you plan to fix it. If you fall below 2%, the state can actually kind of take control of your budget and appoint, and kind of take the responsibility away from the local school board. So 3% is the flat minimum. If you really look at best practice, we should have much more money put away. Palm Beach County government has a 15% raise. The state of Florida, 15% fund balance reserve. The state of Florida has a 15% fund balance reserve. They had it even when Rick Scott kind of had the audacity to call out school districts for sitting on reserves when we were all averaging more like in the 7% range. It's just good financial management. The GFOA best practice would have us, we would want to have at least 2 months of salary and benefits. If you think about a real emergency, and there's governments that run into these things, especially in California, we should have $278 million. We'd have, over $100 million more, $120 million more than we do. We've got our fund balance every 2 weeks runs to $65 million with salary, payroll taxes. We got to pay the IRS, benefits, all of that. GFOA stands for Government Finance Officers Association, if you guys didn't know that. But anyway, they're kind of like, the GFOA is a well-regarded agency that, that opines on this type of stuff, and we rely on their guidance. So anyway, when you start looking at our fund balance in relation to the size of our budget, the size of our payroll, the potential for needing to dip into it with storms and hurricanes and whatever else, it is not unreasonable. If anything, we'd be better off to continue to grow that a little bit. And then just as a sheer, when our budget gets bigger, the board has a self-imposed policy of 3% contingency reserve that they want to keep on hand. So like when we passed the referendum and we brought in $150 million more in revenue, we had to increase our contingency reserve by 3%. So that was a $5 million investment right there. I'm sorry, Denise, do you have a question?
What's GE?
Oh, wait.
General expenses.
And GR is
General revenue.
Because it's 2 months of total operating fund revenues or 2 months of general operating expenditures.
So I think what we're trying to say here is, if we followed the GFOA recommendation, it'd take us about $100 million more in reserves to get there. And we're not proposing that because we understand the reality of running a school district in Florida, but we're not comfortable going lower. The school district's been in operation for over 100 years, and we have a responsibility, the school board has a responsibility to keep us afloat and to keep us prepared for the long term. And, we have a responsibility to our community to serve any student that shows up at our doors. So we have to be very serious about how we manage our monies. There's also credit rating implications that when we borrow money to build schools, our reserves are scrutinized, and we are assigned a credit rating just like you would be with getting your mortgage, and that's an important aspect as well. So, unlike the federal government, the school board has a statutory requirement. They have to adopt a balanced budget every year, and that means our revenue, our expected revenue that's going to come in that year, has to cover the expenses for the same year. We can't say, look, we're going to be a little short on revenue this year, so we'll spend more and we'll worry about later and spend down reserves. We have to have structural balance in our budget, and that means the recurring revenue, the money that we can count on that'll come in year after year, needs to align with our recurring expenditures. And that's one of the problems. It's been suggested that the school board dip into the reserves to pay for a larger salary increase. That's problematic. If the board dipped into the reserves, if they took $9 million this year to pay for the recurring raise, then that means immediately next year they have to either cut another, dip in for another $9 million, or they need to make $9 million in cuts to recurring expenditures. If they do not make the cuts, then you'll see that fund balance drop from 8%, to 6%, to 4%, and they'll be on a path of like a downward spiral. So that's why it's important that we focus a lot on what's our recurring revenue, what's our recurring expense. I think I've covered that. This might be a little, we've probably talked about some of this, but why is it important to have reserves? The revenues and expenditures can be unpredictable. We're heavily dependent on our enrollment, and we've had issues before where enrollment suddenly, we were growing quickly in new students each year, which provides some budget flexibility. And after a couple hurricanes, we saw no enrollment growth and actually a decline in enrollment for a few years. So we're always watching that. Interest rates go up and down. Sometimes if the interest rates are good, we'll pick up a little extra revenue. And now interest rates are on the way back down again. Property tax collections, sometimes they'll come in a little above or below, so we have to be prepared for that. And then, the state mandates has a big impact. It's not uncommon for us to get underfunded or unfunded state mandates that we have to implement. We have potential for being impacted by storms. We've gone through that. We went through it with Irma, was the last one that really impacted us, and we're still working with FEMA to get our money back. There's a variety of things that can happen. I've talked earlier about, if the prospect of a potential recession and what that might do to our funding. The state's heavily dependent on sales tax to fund education. Education is funded basically through local property taxes and state general revenue, or the 6% sales tax that everyone pays in the state. Both those sources are impacted by recessions quite a bit. In a recession, people stop spending. They stop buying refrigerators and fixing up their houses, things like that. And guess what? The property values start going down. So when we went through the last recession, it was like a double whammy. And so we take that pretty serious when we look at and we see reports that we've had the longest period of sustained growth in the nation's economy, and the odds continue to go up that we're going to see some type of correction at some point soon. And then I mentioned the bond ratings. That is an important aspect. We have a finance committee, oversight committee. We have a budget advisory committee that both report to the board. And the finance committee keeps an eye on our debt and investments, and we are constantly being interviewed by rating agencies, and they are looking at our reserves, and they're looking at the trends, and they're looking at what kind of decisions we're making in regards to the financial management team. And the financial management goes well beyond me. We have a whole team. I got Ms. Canust here, of course, our budget director. We've got Ms. Leanne Evans, who is our treasurer, who manages debt and investments. Nancy Samuels is our accounting director. We all do our work on behalf of the superintendent. The school board, as I mentioned, has their advisory committees. And we also have a company called PFM, Public Financial Management, which is a national company that is our hired external financial advisor that really works with our investments in debt. This question came up before recently in 2018. We'll get you a copy of the letter, but we were getting kind of the same conversation around fund balance. I think this was in the wake of Governor Scott's comments about school district were sitting on a bunch of money. So I reached out to PFM and said, would you provide some guidance as to where fund balance should be and all that? And this was for the benefit of our own school board. Anyway, the letter will kind of go on to say, there's all these things you have to consider: the recurring revenue versus recurring expense, the need to have adequate reserves, and that, it would be great to be at 15% or 20%, but that's probably not a reality. So we'll get you a copy of the letter. It's too hard. I know we can't read this on the screen, but there's there is places we can go to get more opinions if you're not comfortable with my own, to weigh in on this conversation about reserves in the district's finances. I mentioned, we're dependent on enrollment, and this is one that's kind of causing me to lose a little bit of sleep as of late. We're looking, this enrollment growth in the state in general has slowed down. Many years ago, Florida was growing quite a bit. We were growing about 5% a year. Now it's more like 1% a year as a state, but we're not bringing in as many kids. Like a few years back, we were bringing in 30,000 students a year. It's dropped below 20,000 students now statewide, and you're seeing more of the people moving to Florida are older baby boomers, and they don't have school children. So we looked at our neighboring counties. Palm Beach is on the top there in dark blue or purple, and this is our percentage of enrollment growth year over year. So what that means is in FY15, Palm Beach grew about 1.8% enrollment growth, and then it dropped to about 1.5%, maybe 1.6% FY17. FY18, it slowed down quite a bit, and you can see we're not alone. This trend is playing out around us in other counties, but we dropped to about 0.4% enrollment growth, and FY19 was nearly flat. We brought in just a few hundred students. If you look at Broward, Dade, and Martin, they're all below 0% the last 2 years, which means they're in declining enrollment. And if that trend continues, or if it makes its way into Palm Beach County, when we build next year's budget, or we're at the bargaining table this time next year, we may have gone through a FT survey and account day where we have fewer kids than we did before. And what that means is we lose the money, but we can't always reduce our cost, right? If you lose a few kids scattered around the whole district, we don't necessarily, we're not getting rid of principals and teachers and staff. Hopefully there's some adjustment with enrollment, that there is some correlation between instructional staffing and students, but not always. Sometimes you just have the same cost and the same overhead with less revenue, and that's the challenge with declining enrollment. We share all that just to say that, the budget's complex. We're a large organization. We do our best to manage the finances. We've worked hard here locally to kind of try to get on a stable, even keel. We're proud of the 4 years of 3% raises. At least we're beating inflation. That was not the case for several years. And our board values our teachers. I think that's pretty clear if anyone watches the board meetings. It's a priority in our budget every year. And, we're doing the best we can in a responsible manner. And I'd like, to try to reconsider our offer. We're sticking with our offer, which was a 3.25% raise for the highly effective, 2.5% for effective, and then, of course, the 0.5% COLA that we're on the same page with. We had great success last year working together. We were concerned about salary compression. You all were concerned about it, and we found a way to deal with it, and we got the community to support us. And we have another opportunity here. I mean, this conversation around teacher salaries, whether you like it or not, what you're hearing, the details, I would suggest that we embrace it as an opportunity, at least, to go after the $600 million, and then maybe try to get the $300 million from Best and Brightest retooled into something that makes more sense. At least we're getting some attention at the state level, and I think we always do better when we work together to have a meaningful impact. So with that, I guess I would open up for any questions.
You were talking about not being able to replicate. If we can go back, I think it was, go back to slide 5. You were asking about not being able to replicate what we had presented to you before as far as the graph goes. And the reason for not replicating that is going to be, we're comparing apples to oranges, I believe. When I calculated, and I'm sorry, my computer's battery died and didn't realize the power wasn't on. When I calculated that and put that spreadsheet or not the spreadsheet, but the graph that showed the declining portion of the general revenue, that was a constant FTE number used from previous years, realizing that from year to year you're going to have some changes in actual staffing. But in order to represent a real comparison year over year, use the exact same number of people within a budget, using that based on what they were paid, and then take that money against the entire general revenue as published in the approved budget. I did not make any of the changes such as excluding charter school pass-through, excluding fund balances and transfers. None of that was done. And it was not a graph of benefits costs. It was literally just salary for the same number of teachers year over year. So that will be a situation why these two graphs may not look the same. I know that whenever we do sit and have these discussions and we talk about the exact same numbers, we're going to get the same opinion. We're going to get the same results in looking at it because there are no opinions about math. But when you pull something out and put it back in, it does. In fairness also, my offer, as published in the last meeting, which showed a continuing declining of a portion of general revenue for that exact number of teachers, that also did not include, as part of the general revenue, a reasonable estimate of what the referendum was because that had a different purpose. So what I wanted to see was to be able to compare apples to apples all the way across. At some point, that can be adjusted so then the going forward projections or comparisons can then take something like that into account. But at this point, it was not fair to do that. So that's going to be one of those pieces there.
But can I just respond to that real quick?
Sure.
I understand what you're trying to do, but if we relied on that analysis to make our decisions in terms of what we can afford and spend, we'd be in trouble. We can't assume a fixed number of teachers. We have to, all dollars are green. All money is going out the door to pay the teacher salaries, their benefits, their health care, FRS, which FRS has gone up in recent years. It could go up dramatically in FY21 because there's a talk about the actuary report that came out and reducing the expected return on investment that the pension fund has. It could cost Palm Beach schools as much as $17 million if they do what they're indicating needs to be done. So we look at total compensation for the workforce, and if I could get away with saying, hey, we'll just pay you 34% of revenue and call it a day for the teachers, we'd be leaving a lot of money off the table. We're in the 60% range. So I guess at the end of the day, we have to make financial decisions on the best information that we have, and we've got access to all the data. We have an ERP system. We've got teams of people working with us. So anyway, I don't know how we reconcile those two analyses.
If I may, one thing, I think it's really unfair, and I don't like to use that word because my predecessor used because fair is where you take your pig to win a prize, right? So I think it's disingenuous to not include benefits. We negotiate benefits as a coalition, right? All the unions are together negotiating for that. And what we can do is provide to you what the board has been increasing, how much they've been paying more, so that we have not raised premiums in, what is it now, 8 and 9 years, or 7 and 8 years?
7 and 8.
7 and 8 years on the two different plans. There is no other governmental entity in this state, and I would even challenge you in the country, who has done that. And we have done that by the board putting more money in it. It is not that we have somehow found some magic key so that healthcare costs don't go up. You cannot say that benefits aren't included, because benefits are part of your contract, and the benefits that you receive and the amount of money that you pay for them is compensable. That is part of the money that we pay for benefits. To say that we're just going to exclude that, we're just talking straight raises, is going to lead to what we're talking about in the back of, every group bargaining insurance on their own. Because if you look at some of these other districts that are giving these great raises, if you go and look on the other end, they're taking it right back through insurance because they're not absorbing the cost of the increased cost of insurance. So I think if we're going to really have that kind of analysis, to exclude benefits is completely, I think it leads people to a different conclusion than what's really there. It's hiding some things.
To your concern about whether something is fair or unfair, then it is also fair to recognize that every one of our proposals over this past 4 or 5 years has in fact shown within it the cost of salary alone and the cost, including benefits, based upon the budgeting requirements for that year and the adjusted percentage for variable fringe benefits cost. Every one of our documents has presented that. So while one graph that I shows one piece of the picture, it's not the whole picture that we've presented year over year. Every year we have recognized that cost of benefits, and we have included that in the proposals. And that's something that should also be recognized. The numbers we're talking about for the most recent offer, the number I think was 9 million, includes the cost of benefits for that proposal. So we're not talking about only salary here. And I'm not assuming that that graph is the whole picture. I'm simply showing that as a matter of choice by way of budgeting, over the past 4 years, the cost of the increases that we have negotiated amounts for those teachers that we negotiate to, on a per teacher basis, a declining portion of general revenue while fund balances continue to increase. And that's hard to explain to my members. That's very difficult to explain to them.
And I understand that, but when the basis for your proposal is you're showing that there's this declining percentage that teachers are getting out of the general fund, but you're leaving out a huge piece, which are the benefits, I think it's a little disingenuous. That's all I'm saying.
And when we make the offer, I would be willing to look at those numbers. I'm not sure it's going to show a lot different from what I've talked about, because again, if the district has, and I'm going to make this case, if the district, as you have demonstrated, has declining growth of students, but then adds teachers to the mix that probably in numbers exceed the amount of revenue that came in new for declining enrollment, then that was a choice. And our continuing argument, my continuing argument is this is a choice as to whether to put something at a greater level of priority or a lesser level of priority. And what we see is an increasing number in the fund balance at a percentage or at a growth line that far outstrips what's being committed to teachers. And I dare say, if I'm looking at your numbers for those same years, the line's not really that much of an increase. It's actually fairly flat. If we go back from 14, which was when the governor, that bargain provided for an agreement that had all of the governor's earmarked money for salaries, that of course did not work the way he said they would work. We all knew that that wasn't going to happen. But from there to where we are today, the difference is 1/10 of a point based upon your graph. That means it's a flat line, but the fund balance continues to increase. And if that fund balance doesn't increase as rapidly on a year-over-year basis, then that money, some of that money, can be allocated to other priorities. Where those priorities are, then becomes a matter of choice.
Yeah.
That's our concern.
Yeah, we're going to debate that next time.
Just to clarify, our enrollment has not declined yet. It's slowed down considerably. It was nearly flat. We had a little uptick this year, but we're concerned about declining enrollment as we look ahead, look at the next few years.
This is just a request. If you would email, I think me, Theo, Justin, and Randall at least, the slideshow,
Oh, sure.
as well as a copy of the PFM letter.
Have you emailed? I know that Mary Powers has asked you
I
multiple times
I was
for
in the
yours.
process of pulling that up, and that's
Okay.
when my computer died.
Because we don't
So-
have a copy of your presentation.
I
So
do.
from
I
last time,
do
you
have a copy.
that?
Yes,
Okay,
Gordon
'cause we
sent
were
it to
looking for it for our office, and we've been asked for
Okay,
that.
yeah.
I can share that. Gordon sent it to
Okay,
me.
thanks.
Do you need I know I gave you
The
Mike said he
PowerPoint.
had.
PowerPoint. I didn't know.
Okay.
And as far as the printed documents, then you have that.
We had the printed documents.
Okay.
I know that Mary was looking for the.
Mike has the
PowerPoint.
slideshow from the last
Yeah, I
meeting.
can send it to you.
Thank you.
All right, any questions?
Not a question, but just an acknowledgement that the district kind of regularly touts the lack of increase in healthcare costs. I mean, we agree the premiums haven't gone up. The district will tout the average 3% raise, which we are looking to increase marginally this year. When we're done negotiations, the district's position is always that this settlement was great. And those settlements only exist because CTA refuses to yield on the district's actual position, which every year is to increase healthcare premiums. Every year the presentation is made to increase.
That is not true. We have not done that in the past, at least since I've been at the table, Mr. Katz.
Literally last year,
We have not.
the opening statements from the district in healthcare were if we don't come to some change in the costs of activities within the healthcare plan, that there will be a $100 per month increase to the family plan. So the reason we have reached these settlements that both sides are able to tout, I'm not denying you the ability to do that, is because we have refused to accept the district's offers and driven in a better direction to come to a compromise that's more palatable. Same thing with the raises. In this case, again, we put out a fair offer last year, and you guys took it on the spot. You made an offer, we made a counter, you
It's
took
not,
it.
you know, I've heard you say that twice now. We didn't take the first offer, right? Last year, I think you guys were initially at 4 and we were at 2, and we worked our way to 3.
You
It wasn't-
guys, I could be
No,
wrong.
We
so.
had. I'll go back because we had a proposal that was turned down, and then we accepted a counter coming back, and it came back equal to the year before, which was a little bit of a stretch for us because of the number of highly effective people had grown, but it wasn't that big. It was really like a 3.06% deal, and we said we wanted to get the deal, so we said okay, we can make that work. But I'm pretty sure there was a little bit of back and forth. We worked quickly. It was a nice, pretty quick round of bargaining.
But Justin, I mean, you and I both know that's part of negotiations. We come in, and our board has put us in a position that's different than yours. We're out in the public, and our board basically says, this is the money we have. Here it is. Offer it to them. Very rarely, and if we can go back and try and get more, we do. But our board, and I'm sure you talk to our board members. I know that you have meetings with them, that they come out and say, this is how much you have. I don't want a nickel and dime about this. Just go and offer them the money. So when we come in, we don't come in lower to try and get up to where we are so it looks like we're moving. We don't have that luxury that you do because you can come in a lot higher than you know you're going to be. You know in your head where you think you can ultimately end up, and you come in higher because that's part of negotiations. We don't get that luxury of doing that because our board says this is the amount of money we have. Go ahead and offer them the full amount right off the bat, which makes it difficult for us to move. And that's a problem that we have internally of trying to get a higher percentage. So if you come in at a number that's close to what we think we can possibly get to by stretching and cutting other things, then we're certainly going to get there because it's in everybody's benefit to get this money in the hands of the teachers. So I feel like you play this off of us of saying, well, we're not being bargaining in good faith. We're not moving. That's because that's what we've been told to do by the board. They don't want us to play games with you. They don't want that kind of negotiations. They want us to come in and say, lay all our cards on the table and say, here is what we have. And that's what we've done this time. This is what we have.
So we'll agree to disagree on some of that. I just think that the point I was trying to make is that the outcomes that are best have come through movement and cooperation. And to your point, I don't exercise that cliche negotiation game where I come in at some absurd number. We don't think that's your opinion on our offer, but we do not think 4.5 is some absurd number. If we wanted to play that game, we would have asked for 6 and then gone down 0.5% until we got to 4.5. So in our position, we see 4.5 as a fair number. We're not going to respond to the offer today other than say that we're not in a position to accept it. We're trying to do what's best for the employees in a fiscally responsible manner. We understand the more you have in the savings account, the reserve balance, the better. But if it comes at the expense of salary growth for the employees, when the bottom could very well fall out. We talk about this referendum, and it's a great thing, but it's not a guaranteed thing. And I shudder to think what would happen in 4 years if it did not pass again, absent additional funding from Tallahassee. So if that should drop out, we can't ignore that. We can sit here and celebrate it today, and we absolutely are with you, but we're looking ahead, and we're saying that the raises we've received in recent years have been fair but not exactly what we've wanted, and we've taken them to be a team player. This year we're asking for a marginal increase in that salary percent as a cushion against, you talk about recession, you talk about FRS. Our big concern on top of those concerns is the referendum's longevity. So we have to plan for the future. We feel this is that. Again, we can't accept the offer today. We're going to go back, review, and we appreciate the effort put into the presentation. We really do, from the CFO. But we'll review this, and we have future dates scheduled after the holidays, and we'll be back with a counter at that time, I believe.
Can I just say one more thing? Thank you. The 1 point, and I agree, we negotiate each year, but there's a pattern. If you look at the past 4 years, the 3% pattern, and trying to do a good job managing our finances contributes to that. And if we were to overspend this year, it would compromise what we're able to do next year or the year after that. And it also puts the board, again, they'd immediately be in this mode to now have to go cut $9 million out of the budget, which would not be easy. The other thing I just want to share is yesterday I presented to the business forum, the economic counselors, the BDB was there, a lot of the big business community groups that we presented to get support for the referendum. And that was not easy, right? Because these business owners, they own a large amount of commercial property. They pay a lot of property taxes. In November, most people paid their property taxes. If you have a mortgage, the escrow takes care of it. And school taxes went up. I mean, for the first time in several years, we're getting phone calls from taxpayers into the budget department. Ms. Knus gets to speak to a lot of them. And they're saying, hey, what happened with school taxes? And my presentation yesterday was first one of gratitude to the business community because they didn't come out and oppose the tax, right? And that was key, their key group to get this tax, to get these referendums passed. And I fully suspect that in 2022 we will be back on the ballot to renew our 1 mil. And continuing a mill levy should be easier than the initial time we first passed it because it's no longer an increase. It's keeping what we have. But if we continue if we can make I think the community is seeing impact. I shared a lot of data about teacher pay with the governor's proposal. That was of great interest, to the business community. They're willing to help us on the legislative front. And, what we did in Palm Beach was really, we took action before the state's gotten around to try to do something about teacher pay. And, they're going at a different angle with just looking at the starting teachers, which is flawed. And the business people recognized the problem with that immediately. But anyway, I do value kind of the bargaining, and the last 4 years, I think we have worked well together. It's not always comfortable. There was years where I would have been happier with 2 or 2.5%, I admit. But I am kind of proud of the work we've done over the years, and I think when we look at other districts, we're doing pretty good. And I hope we can continue that. So thank you.
So do you have any other proposals or anything else at this time?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, then I think we'll see you in January then. Have
All
a
right.
happy holidays, everybody.
Same to you.